Okie dokie. Well, last video we left off, we had the rear end, or I'm sorry, the front differential up in the truck. We hadn't tightened none of the bolts up yet on the upper mounts, lower mounts. Want to give you a little tip. The sides, when you're cutting with the template, is pretty easy. Going across this top is fairly easy, but it's rough getting stuff for me. I mean, we use the Sawzall to go through there, cut through it really nice, but we end up having to take the front end back out because although we got close as we could to the line, couldn't get way up in our head, way up in there to really see everything 100%. When we come back to put everything in, you install your bottom cross member, and this is designed to where this differential bolt mount on this side has a bolt that bolts into your cross member, which that sets it up left to right. It was a 1/4 inch from being toward the driver's side of the bolt going in. What ended up happening was, as you can see up in here, we didn't get it trimmed good enough, and this round part of the mount was hitting, so we had to drop it back out and trim this part of the the bracket in order for it to fit. A little bit of trimming, put it back in, worked just fine. Once you get that back in, you can see the bolt right below it here. That's a single bolt, comes off that mount, and it bolts in through cross member. We'll go lower cross member. As you can see over there, that is your brace. This is what they call in the kit. It comes off your mount to the factory cross member bracket. Once you get this bolt in over here, you tighten it down to torque specifications, and then you go back over and tighten those down to torque specifications. That aligns your front differential left to right. Then you go back and you tighten your top 3 mount bolts. Once those are tightened, you come back down in and tighten the bolts that's on the mount, the lower mount bolt that's on the differential itself. When putting the cross member in, you got to put in the sway bar relocation bracket, because the bolt that goes through here goes through this bracket, through the factory frame, all the way through. That gives it good support. When we put this in and done all this, we left all this loose. So now that all this is tight, then you come back, tighten this up. You still leave this loose. Then you install the front cross member, leaving it loose. The next step is going to be putting the A-arms in on both sides, leaving them loose. Then we're going to come under here, and there is a skid plate that'll go from this lower cross member to that cross member. Once that's installed, you tighten this down. Once the cross members or the skid plates tighten down on the cross members, then you come back and tighten your upper cross member bolts. Remember, all bolts should be torqued to specs. There are specs in the paperwork they give you from Rough Country. Okay, skid plate is in, tightened up. That gives support between the two, sturdied that up. The A-arms also got put in before the top bolts got tightened. That way, if you had to wiggle it a little bit, and you done that before you tightened the skid plate down. So if he's in, tighten the skid plate down. That gives more strength here, forward and backward on the 2 lower cross members. Went around, torqued all 4 upper cross member bolts to 190 foot-pounds of torque. Now we're about to install the nice extension for the dry shaft. This just goes up in place where your dry shaft was. Your dry shaft piece comes into that. They supply you with longer bolts. Unfortunately, they're Allen head. Allen head are good. Allen head might not be good to some people. To me, I don't like them because I don't have a whole lot of sockets with Allen heads on, which I need to buy. Don't forget to get your 2 of these, 3 and 3. Pretty much your spacers, like washers, but they're made together. It goes back on. As before, we didn't take it completely out, so we just got to set this up in to the front differential, move the dry shaft back over, line all the holes up, and tighten down to specs. Okay, here we have this side back together, other than we don't have the tie rod in tight yet, and we don't have the bottom control arm or A-arm, whichever one you like to call it, tight yet. So we can try to roughly align this tire in and out so I can get it to the alignment shop, and I got to get the sway bar on. With the supplied drop brackets, which is just a one flat bracket, you pop everything loose up to there, up to the top when you're wiring. You use the factory bolt, put in your bracket. They supply you a bolt to put the bottom in. You have to straighten this brake line out without kinking it, which is not very hard to do with this line, surprisingly. And then you got to come back through, make sure none of this is going to pinch. I got to do that yet. And they supply some zip ties, or everybody has zip ties, and zip tie that on. Come down, plug your sensor in for your wheel speed. Make sure your vacuum line's on. Everything else just like putting on back on when you're doing your brakes. Slide the brakes over, put your main bracket back on, put your brake pads in, and you put your caliper on. Make sure it's all tightened down. I want to go over here, show you this. This is the new part that you get, drop spindle. First, I want you to look at this. I had some people talk about on the lift kits that it was causing problems with the rack, and it was wearing racks out because it was putting the rack in such a steep angle. There's a difference between the old and the new on that, on the height wise. I want you to look at where the tie rod end goes here. That's level. Tie rod ends down here. On theirs, they have compensated for the lift and made it up higher. Another thing is, this factory bracket is aluminum. I can pick it up with all this on there one-handed, no problem. Once I got it off there, I can fling it around with one finger. This one here is pretty daggone heavy. It's all metal. So what I did is I took this whole thing off when I took it off the truck. So when I've done the driver's side, I come in, went ahead and took my bolts, 3 bolts off, eased that off, set it aside where it wouldn't get dirty. Come back, break these 4 bolts here loose, take them out. Mine with the tap of a hammer over here on this side just a little bit, loosen it up, come right out. Slide that in. When you do, you want to make sure your hole 4, your speed sensor, is up. Run the bolts through from the back on that. Tighten it down. Flip it over. Then you want to make sure the cog on this lines up with the cog on your wheel bearing. Kind of wiggle around. I didn't have too much problems getting it to go in. Once it aligned, I started my 3 bolts, making sure vacuum line is toward the top. And I went around a little bit at a time, tightening each one until they got tight, and then torquing the specs. That sucks that in. Once you go to put it up on the truck, what I did was set down on the ground, had it on this part on top of my knee where I can raise my knee up and down. I got the axle part started, the tip started in there. and I just raised up until I got enough to get a nut on it on the bottom. Then what I did was tighten this up a little bit with a wrench, raise it up some, got it in a straight position, wrenched in here, grabbed the CV joint and turned a little bit and pulled on it toward the outside while I was turning until I felt it slide into the cogs on the inside. Then I made sure by turning the hub assembly, which in turn turned the axle, to make sure it was all lined. Then I stuck the nut on the outside to tighten that all down. Once that was done, if yours is not able to do it, but I was able to get my upper ball joint started in the top. It was like this here, so I was able enough to lift up with my knee and pull down on the top with the A-arm enough to get a nut started. If you cannot do that on your truck, which I think helped where I had that drop or that level kit on, because it made the A-arm already in a steeper angle on the factory, so I think that's what helped me do that when I put it in a new one. If you can't get it like that, you can always put a jack underneath the bottom and jack up a little bit to get it started. And then once it's started, you just hold the bottom part like you did when you took it off, and then tighten the nut down to specs. Then you get back into what I showed you at the beginning of the video of relocating the brake line bracket down and moving all that down and putting your rotor back on, your dust cover on, your rotor on, your brake caliper mounting bracket, brake caliper pads, all that back together. Then you're done with the front. After you get the, of course, the sway bar on, what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna set it down to where there's some weight on the truck a little bit with the tires on it, and try to get an eyeball with a square of a 90-degree angle. And wherever that sets, I'm going to tighten the A-arm bolts down. And I'm also leaving the tie rod ends loose until I get that done. And then once that's done, I'm going to try to see by setting the tie rod down into the bracket to see if it's got the toe in, because you don't want them. I'm pretty sure I'm gonna have to push the tie rod ends out because it was set for that level kit. I'm just trying to get enough to get it to the alignment shop. That way professionals could put it on the alignment rack and get it all there. I don't want it to be fighting itself all the way up the road to the alignment shop. So just try to do that the best you can on getting things set up to where it can go down the road safely. I mean, I don't want to have to drive 5 miles an hour all the way up the road. I mean, if you're real close to the alignment shop, no problem, but I'm probably about 20 minutes away. So I'm going to try to keep adjusting it here this evening after I get the back done to get it the best I can to get it to the alignment shop. But you can do it as you will.